Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. Lara and Thomas had always dreamed of a perfect life. The picket fence, the golden retriever, and most importantly, the perfect child. After years of trying and countless heartbreaks, their wish was granted in the most unexpected way. A small, unassuming adoption agency, one they'd never heard of, called them out of the blue. "We have a match," a soft voice on the other end said. "A truly exceptional child." They were skeptical, but hope, a tenacious weed, had already taken root. When they met 6-year-old Lily, she was everything they could have imagined and more. Her eyes, the color of cornflowers, held an unnerving depth, and her smile was a beacon of pure innocence. She was polite, articulate, and possessed an uncanny intelligence that charmed everyone she met. She excelled at everything: school, piano, ballet, effortlessly mastering tasks that left other children struggling. Lara and Thomas were ecstatic. This was their perfect child. But perfection, they soon learned, had a chilling edge. Lily never threw tantrums, never argued, never even seemed to have a bad day. Her room was always immaculate, her clothes folded precisely, her toys arranged in meticulous order. She spoke in perfectly formed sentences, her vocabulary far beyond her years. There was an unsettling predictability to her, a lack of the messy, unpredictable spontaneity that defined other children. Lara found herself watching Lily, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. It was like living with a flawlessly programmed doll. One evening, Thomas was helping Lily with her homework. She was solving complex algebraic equations with a speed that made him question his own understanding of mathematics. "Lily," he chuckled, "are you sure you're only 6? Lily looked up, her cornflower eyes unblinking. "Of course, Daddy. I am precisely 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days old. Is there a problem with my calculations?" Her voice was devoid of childish inflection, a flat, even tone that sent a shiver down Thomas's spine. Later that night, Lara found Thomas staring at Lily's baby photos. "Don't you think," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "she's too perfect?" Lara nodded, a cold dread settling over her. They had both felt it, the subtle wrongness that hummed beneath Lily's flawless exterior. Her laughter, though sweet, never quite reached her eyes. Her hugs, though frequent, felt strangely detached. The incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling. A neighbor's dog, known for its aggressive barking, suddenly became docile and silent whenever Lily was near, its eyes wide with an unreadable fear. Flowers in their garden, once vibrant, wilted and turned black after Lily touched them, though she always claimed to be watering them. Lara found herself whispering to Thomas in hushed tones after Lily was asleep, their conversations filled with growing apprehension. One morning, Lara woke to a strange, rhythmic tapping coming from Lily's room. She crept to the door and peered inside. Lily was standing by her bed, her back to the door, meticulously polishing a small, silver locket. As she polished, the tapping continued, a faint, metallic sound. Lara noticed that the locket wasn't just silver. It had intricate, almost microscopic carvings on its surface, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. Lily hummed a tuneless, ancient melody, a sound that made the hairs on Lara's arms stand on end. Later that day, a package arrived for Lily. It was from the adoption agency, a small, unmarked box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was another locket, identical to the one Lily had been polishing, and beneath it, a tiny, folded note. Lara picked it up, her hands trembling. The note was written in a precise, almost calligraphic hand. It read, "A spare for when the first begins to dull. Perfection requires maintenance, and remember, she is always listening." Lara dropped the locket, the sound echoing in the silent house. She looked up. Lily was standing in the doorway, her cornflower eyes fixed on her mother, her perfect smile unwavering. "Is something wrong, Mommy?" she asked, her voice as sweet and innocent as ever. But Alara saw it then, a flicker of something ancient and cold in those unnervingly deep eyes. It was not innocence. It was something far, far older. That night, Alara and Thomas sat in their living room, the house silent save for the distant, tuneless humming coming from Lily's room. They talked in whispers, their fear a palpable presence between them. They spoke of the agency, of the strange note, of Lily's unnatural perfection. They considered leaving, fleeing, but the thought of facing the world without their perfect child was unbearable. And besides, where would they go? Lily seemed to be everywhere. As they spoke, a faint, rhythmic tapping began. It was coming from the walls, from the floorboards, from the ceiling. It was the sound of countless tiny, metallic objects, all tapping in unison, a silent, resonant chorus. Alara and Thomas looked at each other, their faces pale with terror. They knew what it was. It was the sound of Lily's maintenance, the sound of her perfection, and they knew, with a chilling certainty, that they were not the parents of a child. They were merely caretakers, tending to something ancient and unknowable, something that had chosen them for its own inscrutable purposes. The perfect child was not a blessing. She was a curse, a meticulously crafted illusion, and they were trapped in her flawless, terrifying world. Sarah and Mark had poured their lives into their children, twins Emily and Josh. Every waking moment revolved around school plays, soccer games, and scraped knees. Their house, once a bustling hub of laughter and chaos, was now eerily quiet. The twins had gone off to college, leaving behind an echoing silence that pressed in on Sarah like a physical weight. Mark tried to fill the void with work, but Sarah found herself wandering the empty rooms, a phantom limb ache for the noise that was no longer there. One evening, Sarah found herself in Emily's old room. The bed was neatly made, the posters still on the walls, a faint scent of lavender clinging to the air. She ran her hand over a dusty bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of forgotten novels. She felt a profound sense of loss, a yearning for the days when the house vibrated with youthful energy. As she turned to leave, she noticed something peculiar. A small, wooden bird's nest, intricately woven, sat on Emily's nightstand. She didn't remember seeing it before. It was empty. The next morning, the nest was gone. Sarah searched the room, then the entire house, but it was nowhere to be found. She mentioned it to Mark, who just shrugged. "Probably put away somewhere, honey. You're just a little emotional." But Sarah knew Emily wouldn't have just put it away. It felt wrong. Days turned into weeks, and the silence in the house grew heavier, more oppressive. Sarah started hearing things, faint whispers from Emily's room, a distant giggle from Josh's. She dismissed them as imagination, the echoes of a house that missed its occupants. But the sounds grew more distinct, more frequent. She heard the faint strumming of Emily's old guitar, the muffled thud of Josh's basketball bouncing in the hallway. One night, she woke to the distinct sound of footsteps padding softly down the hallway. She sat up, her heart pounding. "Mark," she whispered, nudging her sleeping husband. He mumbled in response, still deep in slumber. The footsteps continued, stopping outside the twins' bedroom doors, then moving into the living room. Sarah crept out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She peered into the living room. The moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating two faint, translucent figures. They were Emily and Josh, their forms shimmering like heat haze. They were playing, just as they used to, a silent, spectral game of tag. Their laughter, though soundless, resonated in Sarah's mind, a chilling echo of joy. Sarah stumbled back, a gasp catching in her throat. She wanted to scream, to wake Mark, but she was paralyzed by a fear she'd never known. These weren't her children. Not really. They were something else, something that had taken their place in the empty nest, a haunting reflection of what they had lost. The figures turned, their translucent faces looking directly at her. Their eyes, once bright with life, were now hollow and dark. They smiled a slow, unsettling grin that stretched unnaturally wide. They beckoned her to join them, their silent gestures filled with a profound, unsettling longing. Sarah fled back to her bedroom, slamming the door shut. She woke Mark, shaking him violently. "They're here, Mark. The children. They're in the living room." Mark, groggy and confused, tried to calm her. "It's just a dream, honey. Go back to sleep." But Sarah knew it wasn't a dream. She could still hear the faint, silent laughter, the ghostly thud of the basketball. The next morning, the house was silent again. Mark, convinced Sarah was just stressed, suggested they take a vacation. Sarah agreed, desperate to escape the oppressive quiet and the chilling presence. They packed their bags, leaving the empty house behind. When they returned a week later, the house felt different. The silence was no longer heavy. It was expectant. Sarah walked into the living room. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and old sweat, the faint lingering smells of her children. And then she saw it. On the coffee table, carefully placed, was the wooden bird's nest. And inside it, nestled amongst tiny, spectral twigs, were two small, translucent eggs. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Mark rushed in, his eyes widening as he saw the nest. The eggs pulsed with a faint, internal light, a soft, rhythmic glow. They heard a faint whisper, a chorus of tiny, nascent voices coming from inside the eggs. "Mommy, Daddy, we're home." Sarah and Mark stumbled back, their minds reeling. They realized the empty nest wasn't just a metaphor for their children leaving. It was a literal empty nest, waiting to be filled. And it had been filled, not by their children, but by something that had taken their place, something that was growing, evolving, waiting to hatch. They were no longer parents to Emily and Josh. They were incubators, tending to a new, horrifying brood. The empty nest was not a symbol of loss. It was a promise of a terrifying, unnatural rebirth. And they were trapped, forever bound to the spectral children who had returned to fill their empty home. Clara and Ben had always been proud of their son, Leo. He was a bright, imaginative boy, full of energy and a boundless curiosity. But lately, Leo had started sleepwalking. At first, it was just minor things. Finding him in the kitchen, staring blankly at the refrigerator, or sitting silently in the living room. They attributed it to growing pains, a phase he would eventually outgrow. But the sleepwalking grew stranger, more unsettling. Leo would wander the house at night, his eyes wide open but completely unfocused, his movements fluid and unnaturally silent. He would rearrange furniture, sometimes meticulously, sometimes into bizarre, nonsensical patterns. He would whisper to himself in a language they didn't understand, a soft, sibilant murmur that sent shivers down Clara's spine. One night, Clara woke to a chilling sound. It was the distinct click of the front door opening. She nudged Ben, her heart pounding. "Leo," she whispered. "He's outside." They rushed to the front door, their bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The door was ajar, and the cool night air seeped into the house. They found Leo standing on the front lawn, staring up at the moon, his small body silhouetted against the pale light. He was humming a low, tuneless melody, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. They gently led him back inside, their minds racing. This was more than just sleepwalking. This was something else, something deeply unsettling. They consulted doctors, specialists, but no one could offer an explanation. Leo was perfectly healthy, they said. His brain scans were normal. The sleepwalking continued, escalating in its strangeness. Leo began to draw strange symbols on the walls with his crayons, intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. He would talk to imaginary friends, not with the playful innocence of a child, but with a serious, almost reverent tone, as if he were communicating with something ancient and powerful. One evening, Clara found Leo sitting in his room, surrounded by his toys. He was talking to his teddy bear, his voice a low, guttural growl that was not his own. "They are coming," he said, his eyes wide and unblinking. and they are hungry." Clara froze, her blood running cold. She grabbed Leo, shaking him gently. "Leo, who's coming?" Leo blinked, his eyes slowly focusing on his mother. "Mommy," he asked, his voice soft and innocent. "What are you doing?" Clara and Ben began to fear their own son. They loved him fiercely, but the boy who sleepwalked at night was a stranger, a vessel for something unknown and terrifying. They installed alarms on his door, hoping to prevent him from leaving his room, but the alarms were useless. Leo would simply walk through them, his movements silent and effortless, as if he were a ghost. One night, Clara woke to the sound of soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from Leo's room. She crept to his door and peered inside. Leo was standing by his window, his back to the door, meticulously tapping on the glass. As he tapped, the glass began to glow with a faint blue light, and on the other side of the window, in the darkness of the night, she saw them. They were tall, impossibly thin figures, their bodies shimmering like heat haze. Their eyes, luminous points of blue light, were fixed on Leo, a look of profound hunger on their faces. They were beckoning him to come closer, their silent gestures filled with chilling longing. Clara screamed, a raw, terrified sound. She rushed into the room, grabbing Leo and pulling him away from the window. The figures outside recoiled, their forms flickering and fading into the darkness. Leo blinked, his eyes slowly focusing on his mother. "Mommy," he asked, his voice soft and innocent. "What are you doing?" Clara and Ben knew then. Leo wasn't just sleepwalking. He was a conduit, a doorway for something from another dimension. The entities were trying to cross over, to enter their world, and Leo was their key. They had to protect him, to keep him safe, but they didn't know how. They were parents, but they were powerless against this unseen force. That night, they barricaded Leo's room, piling furniture against the door, covering the windows with thick blankets. They sat by his bed, holding his small hand, their eyes fixed on the door. They could hear the faint tapping sound, a rhythmic, insistent pulse coming from outside the house. It was the sound of the entities, trying to reach their son, trying to break through the barrier. As the night wore on, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. The walls of the house began to vibrate, the floorboards groaning under the unseen pressure. They heard a low, guttural growl, a sound that was not human. It was the sound of profound hunger. They knew they were losing the battle. They looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in his bed, his face innocent and serene. They knew they had to make a choice. They could fight and risk losing him to the entities, or they could surrender and let him go. They were parents, and they would do anything to protect their child, even if it meant letting him go. As the tapping reached a crescendo, the door to Leo's room burst open. The furniture scattered, and the entities poured into the room, their forms shimmering like heat haze, their eyes luminous points of blue light. They reached for Leo, their skeletal hands outstretched. Clara and Ben screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the entities. They watched in horror as their son's small body was enveloped by the shimmering forms, his innocent face disappearing into the blue light. And then he was gone. The entities vanished, leaving behind an empty room, a broken door, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Clara and Ben were left alone, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably changed. They were parents, but they had lost their child to something beyond their comprehension. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of Leo's sleepwalking, the disembodied whispers, and the chilling knowledge that their son was now a part of something ancient and unknowable, a vessel for the entities who had come for him in the night. Their perfect, imaginative boy was gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in their souls. Maria and David had always believed in fostering creativity in their daughter, 8-year-old Lily. So when Lily became obsessed with an antique dollhouse she found at a yard sale, they encouraged her. It was a beautiful, meticulously crafted Victorian mansion in miniature, complete with tiny furniture and even tinier, exquisitely dressed dolls. Lily spent hours in her room, lost in imaginative play, creating elaborate stories for her miniature residents. At first, it was charming. Lily would tell them about the dolls' tea parties, their grand balls, their quiet conversations. But then, the stories began to change. The dolls started having arguments, then silent disagreements. Lily would describe how the tiny mother doll would stare blankly at the tiny father doll, or how the children dolls would hide in the miniature attic, whispering. Maria and David chuckled, attributing it to Lily's increasingly vivid imagination. But the dollhouse itself began to change. Tiny pieces of furniture would move on their own, appearing in different rooms. The miniature curtains would be drawn or opened without Lily touching them. The dolls themselves would sometimes be found in different positions, their tiny, painted eyes seeming to follow Maria as she passed Lily's room. One evening, Maria found Lily sitting in front of the dollhouse, her face pale and drawn. She was staring at the miniature mother doll, which was now standing in the dollhouse's tiny living room, its back to Lily. "She's angry," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "She says Daddy is lying." Maria's blood ran cold. David had been working late, but he'd promised to be home for dinner. He hadn't called. Later that night, David confessed he'd been having an affair. Maria was devastated, their marriage teetering on the brink. But as she sat there, reeling from the betrayal, a chilling thought struck her. How had Lily known? And why had the dollhouse seemed to predict it? The dollhouse became a source of unsettling premonitions. Lily would describe a tiny accident in the dollhouse, and then, days later, a similar event would occur in their own lives. A miniature fire in the dollhouse's kitchen would be followed by a small electrical fire in their own home. A tiny doll falling down the stairs would precede David tripping and spraining his ankle. Maria and David became increasingly terrified of the dollhouse, but Lily was inseparable from it. She would scream if they tried to take it away, her sweet voice replaced by a guttural, unearthly shriek that made the windows rattle. They were trapped, held hostage by their daughter's obsession and the dollhouse's sinister influence. One night, Maria woke to a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from Lily's room. She crept to the door and peered inside. Lily was asleep in her bed, but the dollhouse was bathed in a faint, pulsating light. The miniature mother doll was standing in the tiny living room, its back to Maria, and then the tiny father doll, who had been in the miniature study, slowly turned its head. Its painted eyes, though unseeing, seemed to bore into Maria's soul. Maria stumbled back, a gasp catching in her throat. She watched in horror as the miniature mother doll slowly turned around. Its painted face, once serene, was now twisted into a mask of pure rage. Its tiny, painted mouth opened, and Maria heard a faint, disembodied whisper. "He will pay," it hissed. "They all will pay." Maria fled back to her bedroom, shaking uncontrollably. She woke David, her voice trembling as she told him what she had seen and heard. David, pale and terrified, finally agreed. They had to get rid of the dollhouse. The next morning, while Lily was at school, they carefully carried the dollhouse outside. Its miniature weight felt impossibly heavy in their hands. They drove it to a remote, abandoned landfill, and with trembling hands, they threw it into a deep, muddy pit. They watched as it sank, the tiny, painted faces of the dolls staring up at them from the murky depths. They returned home, a sense of relief washing over them. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. They believed they were free. But that evening, when Lily returned from school, she was unusually quiet. She went straight to her room, and Maria and David heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. They rushed to her room. Lily was sitting on the floor, her back to them, and in front of her, meticulously arranged, was a new dollhouse. It was smaller than the original, made of rough, crudely carved wood, its windows empty holes, and inside, sitting on tiny, makeshift furniture, were two new dolls. They were crudely carved, their faces blank, featureless. But Maria and David recognized them. They were miniature versions of themselves. Lily turned, her cornflower eyes fixed on them, her perfect smile unwavering. "Mommy, Daddy," she said, her voice sweet and innocent. "The old one was broken, but I made us a new one. Now we can play forever." Maria and David screamed, a raw, terrified sound. They were trapped. The dollhouse wasn't just an object. It was a manifestation of Lily's power, a miniature reflection of their own lives. And now, they were the dolls, forever subject to Lily's twisted games, forever trapped in her horrifying, miniature world. Sarah and Tom lived a quiet, suburban life, their days revolving around their two young children, 7-year-old Mia and 5-year-old Leo. Their nights were usually peaceful, punctuated only by the occasional cry from a bad dream. But that changed when the call started. It began subtly. A single, muffled ring at precisely 3 a.m., always from an unknown number. Sarah would pick up, her voice a sleepy whisper, but there would be nothing on the other end, just a faint, crackling silence. She'd hang up, attributing it to a wrong number, a prank call. But the calls continued, night after night, always at 3 a.m., and the silence on the other end began to change. It wasn't just crackling. It was a faint, rhythmic breathing, a slow, deliberate inhale and exhale that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. She tried to block the number, but the call still came through, caller ID always unknown. Tom, a pragmatic engineer, dismissed her fears. "It's just some telemarketer, honey. Don't worry about it." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The breathing on the other end felt too real, too close. It felt like someone was in their house, watching them, waiting. One night, the breathing on the phone was joined by a new sound, a faint, childish whisper. It was Mia's voice, clear and distinct, saying, "Mommy, are you there?" Sarah gasped, her blood running cold. She looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. She rushed to Mia's room, her heart pounding. Mia was asleep in her bed, breathing softly, her face serene. Sarah went back to the phone, her hand trembling. "Mia," she whispered into the receiver. The breathing on the other end intensified, and then a slow, deliberate giggle, a sound that was unmistakably Mia's. But it was a chilling, unnatural giggle, a sound that was devoid of childish joy. The calls continued, and the sounds grew more disturbing. They heard Leo's voice, distorted and guttural, saying, "Daddy, I'm scared." They heard the faint sound of their children's toys rattling, their lullabies playing, all coming from the phone at 3 a.m., while their children slept soundly in their beds. Sarah and Tom were terrified. They unplugged all the phones, disconnected the landline, even turned off their cell phones at night. But the call still came, the sound of the phone ringing, a phantom sound that only Sarah could hear, would pierce the silence of their bedroom at 3 a.m. And when she answered, the breathing and the whispers would be there, a chilling reminder that they were not safe. One night, Sarah woke to the familiar phantom ring. She sat up, her heart pounding. She looked at the clock. 3 a.m. She nudged Tom, her voice a terrified whisper. "It's here, Tom. It's in the house." They heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the children's room. They crept to the children's door and peered inside. Mia and Leo were standing by their window, their backs to them, tapping on the glass. Their eyes, wide open but unfocused, were staring out into the darkness. And on the other side of the window, in the darkness of the night, they saw them. They were tall, impossibly thin figures, their bodies shimmering like heat haze. Their eyes, luminous points of red light, were fixed on Mia and Leo, a look of profound hunger on their faces. They were beckoning them to come closer, their silent gestures filled with chilling longing. Sarah and Tom screamed a raw, terrified sound. They rushed into the room, grabbing their children and pulling them away from the window. The figures outside recoiled, their forms flickering and fading into the darkness. Mia and Leo blinked, their eyes slowly focusing on their parents. "Mommy? Daddy?" they asked, their voices soft and innocent. "What's wrong?" Sarah and Tom knew then. The midnight caller wasn't just a prankster. It was something from another dimension, something that was trying to lure their children away. The phone calls were a distraction, a way to keep them awake, to wear them down, to make them vulnerable. And the figures outside the window were the real threat, the ones who were waiting to take their children. They barricaded the children's room, piling furniture against the door, covering the windows with thick blankets. They sat by their children's beds, holding their small hands, their eyes fixed on the door. They could hear the faint tapping sound, rhythmic, insistent pulse coming from outside the house. It was the sound of the entities, trying to reach their children, trying to break through the barrier. As the night wore on, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. The walls of the house began to vibrate, the floorboards groaning under the unseen pressure. They heard a low, guttural growl, a sound that was not human. It was the sound of profound hunger. They knew they were losing the battle. They looked at Mia and Leo, sleeping peacefully in their beds, their faces innocent and serene. They knew they had to make a choice. They could fight and risk losing them to the entities, or they could surrender and let them go. They were parents, and they would do anything to protect their children, even if it meant letting them go. As the tapping reached a crescendo, the door to the children's room burst open. The furniture scattered, and the entities poured into the room, their forms shimmering like heat haze, their eyes luminous points of red light. They reached for Mia and Leo, their skeletal hands outstretched. Sarah and Tom screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the entities. They watched in horror as their children's small bodies were enveloped by the shimmering forms, their innocent faces disappearing into the red light. And then they were gone. The entities vanished, leaving behind an empty room, a broken door, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Sarah and Tom were left alone, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably changed. They were parents, but they had lost their children to something beyond their comprehension. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of the midnight caller, the disembodied whispers, and the chilling knowledge that their children were now a part of something ancient and unknowable, a vessel for the entities who had come for them in the night. Their beloved children were gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in their souls. Eleanor and James had always wanted a child, and after years of trying, they were finally expecting. Their joy was boundless, their anticipation palpable. They spent months meticulously decorating the nursery, painting the walls a soft pastel yellow, assembling a crib, and filling it with plush toys. It was a room of dreams, a sanctuary for the child they so desperately longed for. But their dreams were shattered when Eleanor suffered a late-term miscarriage. The silence that followed was deafening, a hollow ache that settled deep in their bones. The nursery, once a symbol of hope, became a painful reminder of their loss. They couldn't bring themselves to dismantle it, to erase the last vestiges of their unborn child. It remained untouched, a silent testament to their grief. Then the sounds began, faint at first, almost imperceptible. A soft cooing from the nursery, a gentle lullaby hummed in a voice that wasn't Eleanor's. They dismissed it as imagination, the cruel tricks of a grieving mind. But the sounds grew clearer, more distinct. They heard the faint rattle of a toy, the gentle creak of the rocking chair, the soft patter of tiny feet across the wooden floor. One night, Eleanor woke to the distinct sound of a baby crying. It was a soft, plaintive wail coming from the nursery. She nudged James, her heart pounding. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. James, groggy and confused, listened for a moment. "It's nothing, honey, just the wind." But Eleanor knew it wasn't the wind. She crept out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She peered into the nursery. The room was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, and the crib was gently rocking back and forth. Inside, nestled amongst the plush toys, was a faint, translucent form. It was a baby, its tiny limbs flailing, its face contorted in a silent cry. It was their baby, the one they had lost. Eleanor gasped, a mixture of terror and overwhelming longing washing over her. She reached out, her hand trembling, wanting to touch the ethereal form, to hold her child, but her hand passed right through it, as if it were made of smoke. The baby's cries intensified, a soundless wail that resonated in Eleanor's mind, a chilling echo of grief. James rushed in, his eyes widening as he saw the translucent form in the crib. He too reached out, his face a mask of sorrow and fear. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their child was here, but not here, a phantom presence in the echoing nursery. The haunting intensified. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent, filling the house with a pervasive, heart-wrenching sound. They heard the sound of tiny hands patting the walls, the faint gurgle of a baby laughing, all coming from the nursery, a constant reminder of their loss. Eleanor and James became prisoners in their own home, unable to escape the echoing nursery. They tried to close the door, but it would always swing open again, as if an unseen hand were pushing it. They tried to remove the crib, but it was rooted to the floor, an immovable monument to their grief. One night, Eleanor woke to the sound of the baby crying, but it was different now. It was a desperate, pleading wail, a sound of profound pain. She rushed to the nursery, James close behind her. The room was no longer bathed in a soft glow. It was dark, and the air was thick with a chilling cold. The crib was shaking violently, and the translucent form of the baby was thrashing, its tiny limbs flailing. And then they saw it. A shadowy, distorted figure was standing over the crib, its long, skeletal fingers reaching for the baby. It was a creature of pure darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. It was trying to take their child. Eleanor screamed, a raw, terrified sound. She rushed forward, trying to push the creature away, but her hands passed right through it. James joined her, his face a mask of terror, but he too was powerless. They were parents, but they couldn't protect their child from this unseen evil. The shadowy figure enveloped the translucent form of the baby, and the cries intensified, a soundless wail that tore at Eleanor's soul. And then the baby was gone. The shadowy figure vanished, leaving behind an empty crib, a silent nursery, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Eleanor and James were left alone, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably changed. They were parents, but they had lost their child twice. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of the echoing nursery, phantom cries, and the chilling knowledge their child was now a part of something ancient and unknowable, a vessel for the entities who had come for it in the night. Their dreams of parenthood were gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in their souls. Michael and Sarah were a young couple, just starting their family. Their 2-year-old daughter, Lily, was their world, a bright, bubbly child who loved to draw. Their refrigerator was a gallery of her masterpieces, stick figures, colorful scribbles, and abstract shapes. They encouraged her creativity, buying her endless supplies of crayons and paper. One morning, Michael walked into the living room and stopped dead. On the pristine white wall, above the fireplace, was a drawing. It was a crude, childlike depiction of a monster, a tall, shadowy figure with long, spindly limbs and glowing red eyes. It was terrifying, a creature straight out of a nightmare. "Lily," he exclaimed, his voice sharp with surprise. "Did you draw this?" Lily, sitting on the floor playing with her blocks, looked up, her innocent face a picture of confusion. "No, Daddy," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't draw that." Michael and Sarah were perplexed. They were the only ones in the house. They cleaned the drawing off the wall, attributing it to a vivid dream or a trick of the light. But the next morning, the drawing was back, bolder and more detailed than before. This time, the monster had a small, stick-figure child clutched in its hand. The drawings continued, appearing on different walls in different rooms, always when they weren't looking. The monster grew more menacing, its features more defined. It was always there, a silent, terrifying presence, a chilling reflection of their deepest fears. And always, it was holding a child. Michael and Sarah became increasingly terrified. They installed security cameras, hoping to catch the culprit, but the cameras showed nothing. The drawings would simply appear, as if by magic, on the blank walls. They consulted psychologists, hoping for a rational explanation, but no one could offer one. Lily was a normal, healthy child, they said. Her drawings were typical for her age. One night, Michael woke to a faint scratching sound. It was coming from Lily's room. He crept to her door and peered inside. Lily was asleep in her bed, but the walls of her room were covered in drawings. The monster was everywhere, its glowing red eyes staring out from every surface. And in the center of the room, standing over Lily's bed, was a shadowy figure. It was the monster from the drawings, tall and spindly, its glowing red eyes fixed on Lily. Michael gasped, his blood running cold. He rushed into the room, his heart pounding. "Get away from her!" he screamed, his voice raw with terror. The shadowy figure turned, its glowing red eyes fixed on Michael. It raised a long, skeletal hand and pointed at Lily. Then, it pointed at the wall, at a new drawing that had just appeared. It was a drawing of Michael, his face contorted in a mask of terror, being dragged away by the monster. Sarah rushed in, her eyes widening as she saw the shadowy figure and the new drawing. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their child was being targeted by something unseen, something that was manifesting through her art. The shadowy figure began to move, its movements fluid and unnaturally silent. It glided toward Michael, its long, skeletal fingers reaching for him. Michael stumbled back, his mind reeling. He was a man of logic and reason, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. He was not a fool. He and Sarah grabbed Lily, pulling her out of the room. They ran out of the house, their bare feet pounding on the pavement. They didn't look back. They drove for hours, their minds racing, their hearts pounding. They were safe for now, but they knew they could never go back. They tried to start over, to build a new life, to forget the monster in the drawings. But the drawings followed them. They would appear on the walls of their new home, on the pages of Lily's coloring books, even on their own skin. The monster was always there, a silent, terrifying presence, a chilling reminder of their past. One morning, Michael woke to a faint scratching sound. It was coming from his own arm. He looked down. A new drawing had appeared on his skin, a crude, childlike depiction of the monster, its glowing red eyes staring out from his forearm. And in its hand, it was holding a small, stick-figured child. Michael screamed a raw, terrified sound. He realized the monster wasn't just a drawing. It was real. It was a part of them, a manifestation of their own fear. They were parents, but they had failed to protect their child. They had brought the monster into their lives, and now it was here to stay. They were haunted by the memory of the drawings, the shadowy figure, and the chilling knowledge that the monster was now a part of them, a permanent tattoo on their souls. Their lives were irrevocably changed, their dreams of a perfect family shattered. They were parents, but they were also victims, forever bound to the monster that had come for them in the night, a silent, terrifying presence that would never leave them alone. Emily and Ben were worried about their daughter, 4-year-old Chloe. She was a quiet, imaginative child, but lately she'd become withdrawn, spending all her time talking to an imaginary friend she called Mr. Whispers. At first, they thought it was cute, a normal part of childhood development, but Mr. Whispers became increasingly real to Chloe and increasingly unsettling to them. Chloe would describe Mr. Whispers in vivid detail, tall and shadowy, with long, spindly fingers and a voice like rustling leaves. She would tell them about the games they played, the secrets they shared. She would insist on setting an extra place at the dinner table for Mr. Whispers, and would get upset if they didn't acknowledge his presence. Emily and Ben tried to gently discourage Chloe from her imaginary friend, but she would just get angry, her sweet voice replaced by a guttural, unearthly shriek that made the windows rattle. They consulted child psychologists, who assured them it was a phase, a coping mechanism for a shy child. But Emily and Ben knew it was more than that. One night, Emily woke to a chilling sound. It was Chloe's voice, whispering in the next room, but it was not her usual sweet tone. It was a low, sibilant murmur, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "Mr. Whispers," Chloe whispered, "tell me another story." Emily crept to Chloe's door and peered inside. Chloe was sitting up in bed, staring at an empty corner of the room, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was listening intently, her small head tilted as if to catch every word. Emily saw a faint, shimmering distortion in the air in the corner of the room, a subtle wavering that suggested a presence, though nothing visible. The air grew cold, a freezing, unnatural chill. She heard a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a pavement. It was the sound of Mr. Whispers. Emily stumbled back, a gasp catching in her throat. She rushed into the room, grabbing Chloe and pulling her into her arms. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are you talking to?" Chloe looked up, her eyes slowly focusing on her mother. "Mr. Whispers, Mommy," she said, her voice soft and innocent. "He tells the best stories." Ben rushed in, his eyes widening as he felt the chilling cold in the room. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their child was communicating with something unseen, something that was slowly taking over her mind. The incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling. Chloe would wake up with strange scratches on her arms, claiming Mr. Whispers had been playing with her. She would talk about things she couldn't possibly know, secrets about their past, details about their lives that only they knew. Mr. Whispers was learning about them through Chloe, gathering information, preparing for something. One evening, Emily found Chloe in the living room, meticulously arranging their family photos on the coffee table. She was talking to Mr. Whispers, her voice a low, guttural growl that was not her own. "They are ready," she said, her eyes wide and unblinking, for the next story. Emily froze, her blood running cold. She looked at the photos. They were arranged in a strange, unsettling pattern, a timeline that seemed to lead to a single, terrifying conclusion. Emily and Ben knew then, Mr. Whispers wasn't just an imaginary friend. He was a malevolent entity, a parasitic presence that was slowly consuming their daughter, using her as a conduit to enter their lives. They had to fight back to save Chloe, but they didn't know how. They were parents, but they were powerless against this unseen force. They consulted experts, psychics, exorcists, desperate for a solution, but nothing worked. Mr. Whispers was too powerful, too deeply embedded in Chloe's mind. The entity seemed to feed on their fear, growing stronger with each passing day. One night, Emily woke to a chilling sound. It was Chloe's voice, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a loud, clear voice, a voice that was not Chloe's. It was Mr. Whispers. "It's time," he said, his voice echoing through the house, a sound like rustling leaves. The story begins. Emily and Ben rushed to Chloe's room. The room was bathed in a blinding white light, and Chloe was floating above her bed, her small body convulsing. Her eyes were wide open, but they were no longer Chloe's eyes. They were glowing with a malevolent green light. And then they saw it. A shadowy, distorted figure was standing over Chloe, its long, spindly fingers reaching for her. It was Mr. Whispers, its form now visible, a creature of pure darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. Emily and Ben screamed, raw, terrified sound. They rushed forward, trying to push the creature away, but their hands passed right through it. They were parents, but they couldn't protect their child from this unseen evil. Mr. Whispers enveloped Chloe, and the blinding light intensified, a soundless scream that tore at Emily's soul. And then Chloe was gone. Mr. Whispers vanished, leaving behind an empty room, a silent house, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Emily and Ben were left alone, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably changed. They were parents, but they had lost their child to something beyond their comprehension. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of the unseen friend, the chilling whispers, and the terrifying knowledge that their daughter was now a part of something ancient and unknowable, a vessel for the entity who had come for her in the night. Their beloved child was gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in their souls. Sarah had always loved singing lullabies to her infant daughter Lily. Her voice, soft and melodic, would soothe Lily to sleep, a comforting ritual that brought them both peace. But lately, the lullabies had taken on a chilling new dimension. It began subtly. Sarah would sing a familiar lullaby, and then a faint echo would follow, a second voice, soft and ethereal, harmonizing with hers. She dismissed it as her imagination, a trick of the acoustics in the nursery. But the echo grew clearer, more distinct, a perfect, ethereal harmony that seemed to come from nowhere. One night, Sarah was singing to Lily, her voice a gentle murmur. The echo joined her, perfect, ethereal harmony that filled the room. But then the echo continued after Sarah stopped singing, a soft, disembodied voice humming the lullaby, its melody hauntingly beautiful. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. She looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Sarah tried to find the source of the sound. She searched the nursery, then the entire house, but there was nothing. The lullaby continued, a soft, ethereal hum that seemed to emanate from the very air. She consulted doctors, convinced she was hallucinating, but they found nothing wrong with her. The lullaby grew more unsettling. The disembodied voice would hum new melodies, strange, ancient tunes that Sarah had never heard before. They were beautiful, but deeply unsettling, filled with a profound sadness and a chilling sense of longing. Lily, however, seemed to love them. She would coo and gurgle in her sleep, her tiny hands reaching out as if to grasp the unseen singer. One evening, Sarah found Lily sitting up in her crib, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at an empty corner of the room. She was humming along with the disembodied voice, her tiny voice a perfect, ethereal harmony with the unseen singer. Sarah saw a faint, shimmering distortion in the air in the corner of the room, a subtle wavering that suggested a presence, though nothing visible. The air grew cold, a freezing, unnatural chill. Sarah stumbled back, a gasp catching in her throat. She rushed into the room, grabbing Lily and pulling her into her arms. "Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are you singing with?" Lily looked up, her eyes slowly focusing on her mother. "The lady, Mommy," she said, her voice soft and innocent. "She sings pretty songs." Ben rushed in, his eyes widening as he felt the chilling cold in the room. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their child was communicating with something unseen, something that was slowly taking over her mind. The incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling. Lily would wake up with strange, intricate braids in her hair, claiming the lady had done them. She would talk about things she couldn't possibly know, secrets about their past, details about their lives that only they knew. The lady was learning about them through Lily, gathering information, preparing for something. One night, Sarah woke to a chilling sound. It was the lullaby, but it was no longer a soft hum. It was a loud, clear song, a song that was not Sarah's. It was the lady's voice, singing a hauntingly beautiful melody, a song that filled the house with a pervasive, heart-wrenching sound. Sarah rushed to the nursery. The room was bathed in a blinding, white light, and Lily was floating above her crib, her small body convulsing. Her eyes were wide open, but they were no longer Lily's eyes. They were glowing with a malevolent blue light. And then they saw it. A shadowy, distorted figure was standing over Lily, its long, skeletal fingers reaching for her. It was the lady, its form now visible, a creature of pure darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent blue light. Ben rushed in, his eyes widening as he saw the shadowy figure and the new drawing. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their child was being targeted by something unseen, something that was manifesting through her art. Sarah and Ben screamed, a raw, terrified sound. They rushed forward, trying to push the creature away, but their hands passed right through it. They were parents, but they couldn't protect their child from this unseen evil. The lady enveloped Lily, and the blinding light intensified, a soundless scream that tore at Sarah's soul. And then Lily was gone. The lady vanished, leaving behind an empty crib, a silent nursery, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Sarah and Ben were left alone, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably changed. They were parents, but they had lost their child to something beyond their comprehension. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of the lullaby, the chilling whispers, and the terrifying knowledge that Their daughter was now a part of something ancient and unknowable, a vessel for the entity who had come for her in the night. Their beloved child was gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in their souls. David and Emily were a loving couple, proud parents to their teenage son, Alex. Their home was filled with laughter, shared stories, and countless cherished memories. They had photo albums crammed with snapshots of family vacations, school plays, and birthday parties. Their lives were a rich tapestry woven with shared experiences. But then, the memories started to disappear. It began subtly. A forgotten birthday, a misplaced vacation photo. They dismissed it as age, the natural progression of time. But the gaps grew larger, more frequent. They would find themselves staring blankly at family photos, unable to recall the events depicted. They would talk about shared experiences, only to realize that one of them had no recollection of it. Alex, their son, seemed unaffected. He remembered everything, his memories sharp and vivid. He would try to remind them, to fill in the blanks, but his words would just echo in their minds, hollow and meaningless. They consulted doctors, convinced they were suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's, but their tests came back normal. One evening, David was looking through an old photo album. He found a picture of Alex as a toddler, sitting on a swing set. He smiled, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. But then he looked closer. There was a faint, shimmering distortion in the background of the photo, a subtle wavering that suggested a presence, though nothing visible. The air grew cold, a freezing, unnatural chill. He heard a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a pavement. It was the sound of something unseen. David stumbled back, a gasp catching in his throat. He rushed into the living room, where Emily was reading. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong with the photos." Emily looked at the photo, her eyes widening as she saw the shimmering distortion. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their memories were being stolen, one by something unseen. The incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling. They would wake up with no memory of the previous day, their minds a blank slate. Alex would tell them about conversations they'd had, events they'd attended, but they would have no recollection of them. The entity seemed to feed on their memories, growing stronger with each stolen moment. One night, David woke to a chilling sound. It was Alex's voice, whispering in the next room, but it was not his usual sweet tone. It was a low, sibilant murmur, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "They're almost empty," Alex whispered. "Almost ready." David crept to Alex's door and peered inside. Alex was sitting up in bed, staring at an empty corner of the room, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was holding a small, glowing orb in his hand, and as he held it, the orb pulsed with a faint, internal light. David saw a faint, shimmering distortion in the air in the corner of the room, a subtle wavering that suggested a presence, though nothing visible. The air grew cold, a freezing, unnatural chill. He heard a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across a pavement. It was the sound of the entity. David stumbled back, a gasp catching in his throat. He rushed into the room, grabbing Alex and pulling him into his arms. "Alex," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Alex looked up, his eyes slowly focusing on his father. "Just helping, Daddy," he said, his voice soft and innocent. "Helping the lady collect." Emily rushed in, her eyes widening as she felt the chilling cold in the room. They were parents, but they were powerless. Their son was collaborating with something unseen, something that was stealing their memories. The entity, now visible as a shadowy, distorted figure, emerged from the corner of the room. Its long, skeletal fingers reached for David and Emily, and as it touched them, a wave of cold washed over them, and another memory vanished. They watched in horror as their lives, their shared history, their very identities, were slowly being erased. David and Emily screamed, a raw, terrified sound. They rushed forward, trying to push the creature away, but their hands passed right through it. They were parents, but they couldn't protect themselves from this unseen evil. The entity enveloped them, and the blinding light intensified, a soundless scream that tore at their souls. And then they were gone. The entity vanished, leaving behind an empty room, a silent house, and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Alex was left alone, his face serene, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was holding the glowing orb in his hand, and as he held it, the orb pulsed with a faint, internal light. He was the only one left, the sole keeper of their memories, a silent witness to their disappearance. He was a son, but he was also a collaborator, a vessel for the entity who had come for his parents in the night. Their beloved parents were gone, replaced by an empty space, a perpetual ache in his soul.